Hello everyone. For those of you who don't know, which will be none of you, this is Jude. I was wondering if maybe you wanted to start by just giving us a brief introduction to who you are.
Okay, so I'm Jude Rogers. It's very weird being passed back, it's so lovely. I was looking at the poster in the lounge earlier on and was going, Patrick Marber, I'll be a gentleman, and there's me. That's so weird. I came to Wadham in 1996, to 1999. I studied English Lit with the amazing Bernard Donahue behind you. Bernard was instrumental in making me realise that Wadham was the right decision. I'm not embarrassing too much, but he did give my mum and dad and I a lovely tour after I'd got my place and made us all feel very at ease with the idea that I was coming here. I went to a state school and one member of my family, who was considered a big eccentric, had gone to university before and everybody else hadn't done anything like that. So coming here was quite strange. But yeah, I studied English, got a 2-1, got out the other end. I lived at Staircase 1, and then I lived at Staircase 10 in my third year. I lived down the Abingdon Road, which was about the move of the house I was in, slides, in the second year. And I was actually president as well the second year, which was full on for 2 terms, and I left. I dropped out doing it. And in my second and third year, started really just spending loads of time in the right, the camera or the bar. The bar over there, not the new one. But yeah, so yeah, it's now, it's 26 years, 25 and a bit years since I started here, which is very weird. But it's lovely to come back. That's me. I should tell you a little about why I'm here. I suppose any of the students, I've been chosen to be here because apparently I've done stuff, which is great. But I'm a journalist. I didn't become a journalist until I was 25, which we might talk about. I did other things after coming here for a bit, but I worked for a music magazine. I made a fanzine, which was got picked up by a music magazine, which gave me a part-time job, which I got when I was 25. And eventually I got into freelancing, and I went completely freelance in 2008. I've written about music since the start, and obviously my book is about music. I write about lots of other things too, lots of culture and arts stuff. Also general features and politics. I do loads of interviews. I love doing interviews. And in recent years I've also got into broadcasting and radio documentary making. I had a Radio 4 series last year about music. I tell Bernard right now that I've got a Radio 4 documentary later this year on the wasteland. I'm so excited because my undergraduate thesis is basically the basis for my Radio 4 documentary coming up later in the year. So it's only taken 23 years for that to flourish. So I do lots of things, but I'm best known as a music journalist. And I wrote a book last year, which came out about 3 weeks ago, and it was in Blackwell's today, and it was very exciting. So that's me.
I thought first it might be nice to talk about your time at Wadham, and specifically, I don't know if this is going to bring back traumatic memories, but your time as SU Pres, I want to pick up on. Just because I think Wadham is a college that is quite renowned for its activism, and especially what the SU does. I think this is quite sort of a good time to be touching on this, because the SU has just passed, just basically got college to grant living wage to all college staff.
Amazing.
Finally.
Fantastic.
And we've also got through a ban on, I don't know if it's officially happened yet, but it's happening, a ban on student-teacher relationships formally, which is really good. So some big stuff has been happening currently. And I was just wondering what it was like when you were here, and whether any big sort of activism things took place.
Yes. So I started here in October '96. The following May was just the 25th anniversary of the May 1st, 1997 general election. which I experienced in Wadham, which was insane. I was 19, I just voted for the first time, not for Labour, which is my natural predilection, coming from South Wales. If I'd voted for anything else, I'd probably be shot. I'll give my background. But yeah, we all voted Lib Dem again, because it was a Tory Lib Dem marginal, and there was no way, if Labour voters were told to vote Lib Dem, the Lib Dem guy got in. And yeah, that was an amazing night. I think that at that time was, we got a Labour government and there'd been a Tory government since I was 1. And I'm aware I'm saying all this now when we're in a very different position. It makes you realise how, when things feel really solid and progressive, things can change and you've got to keep being an activist, basically. A year later, we found out about basically Labour decided they were going to bring in tuition fees. I had a full grant when I came here for 3 years. And I still worked in my holidays here as a porter in the morning, scout in the mornings, porter in the afternoons, and did the telephone fundraising in the evenings, all which I thoroughly recommend anybody does. If you've don't done any of those things, just see how college works and how different people are treated within college. It's, I earned some money that helped me, pay for my CDs. I know you don't have to do that anymore. Like most of my student loan went on buying £10 CDs in H&B and Polar Bear. I don't know if that's there anymore in St Clements. Anyway, I was the student union president when we had a big protest against the being announced of tuition fees. I loved shouting into a microphone and rallying people. There was then I think a lot of people were already getting quite blasé because there was the people of the left-wing persuasion were getting quite blasé anyway. But apart from in Wadham, I felt there was still a lot of spirit, and there was lots of people who supported the Green Party. Even then, I remember that was a big thing. And I was very proud of our flag, which I was asking William about earlier on, which was a college flag, which was bright pink, had a black power fist on it, it had C&D symbol, all the gender-related symbols you can imagine and more, picture of a womb, it was all happening. It was very, there was a pride in that history of activism in Wadham. And I couldn't believe it now when I walked through the cafe, it's called now, which is in the space that JCR used to be, and there's the painting of Nelson Mandela, and then I remember the Nelson, doing free Nelson Mandela dance at the end of Bop, I guess the word Bop, was such a massive thing. I'm chuffed it still is. And also, I know I dropped the bombshell that Nelson Mandela visited Oxford in 1997 when the Islamic Studies Centre, I think it's called, opened. He did a talk there, and he came and had dinner at Wadham, put his security guards aside, and came and talked to all of us on the front quad and shook my hand and talked to me about Welsh rugby. It was very weird. So when people ask me, who's the most famous person you met in your career? I said the most famous person I met was not in my career, it was Nelson Mandela on the front quad of Wadham. Having Wadham's always had a spirit about it. Thank God I came here, since to you. There were some other colleges that felt very active at the time. Balliol felt quite active at the time. But people are laughing now. No, it was quite, and the president of Balliol was brilliant guy called Mark Strathdine, who has long been a secondary school teacher in North London. He was amazing. We thought he'd be the next, Labour Prime Minister. He was amazing. He's still behind. But Wadham was this hotbed of activism still then, even if it wasn't as full on some points it had been in its history, I guess. But I felt very proud to be part of it.
Do you think that sort of activist spirit is something that you've, because I'm imagining that it existed before Wadham, but do you think the sort of Wadham effect of making you more sort of involved in the activism is something that has stayed with you?
Yeah, definitely. And my family, my stepfather was involved with the Labour Party. I grew up in South Wales in the 1980s. My family wasn't directly affected by what went on with the mining communities, but my stepfather worked in the steel industry. He was made redundant 3 times. We saw, we felt the effects of that. He was made redundant when my baby brother was 3 months old. We felt the effects of it, even though we were a middle-class family. My mum was a primary school teacher. My dad generally had job as a clerk. You know, we had, you know, we weren't, I did feel sometimes that when I was at Oxford, some people heard my accent and heard I went to state school and thought, you know, you must have, you know, I had a very comfortable life, as, you know, in many respects as a young person. But Labour politics was a big thing, but I didn't act upon them. I thought about them much more. Well, I didn't think about Labour, I thought about politics much more when I was here. And it's something that, has stayed with me. It's funny, being a bit older now, I have a son, he's 8, and he's a bit older, and I've just become a community counsellor where I live. And, you know, I've just published a book, and I've just become a community counsellor, it's a bit weird. But I've started doing things there already. I feel like that spirit of activism is something that, I don't know, it feels like people just want to do more on a local level or maybe on a college level now and just do things because, well, in my opinion, everything else around us is pretty depressing. But yeah, it was here in Wadham and there were lots of great students who embodied that spirit. You know, we had some great people involved in the SU, and also we had an amazing president when I started here, Dan Butt, who's a lecturer at Oriel. He was private school educated, all this stuff, you know, posh voice, all this stuff. But he was the most amazing, inspirational guy, and I decided he didn't go to politics because he was amazing, and he was a real activist. He's a brilliant politics lecturer in Oriel now. Probably, you know, being very rebellious and getting everybody to read things that go against the canon, which is good.
You studied English.
I did.
And I was wondering how you have found that to have affected you beyond your studies. Like, how did your study of English here shape the way that you've thought about, I guess, the world and books, writing your own book? What do you think, because obviously you got a degree out of it, but what do you think you got out of studying English here?
I'd say because Bernard's here. No, what I loved about it, I've had a sort of mixed experience at Oxford in some respects. You know, I made great friends, I had a great time. I did feel a bit overwhelmed quite a lot of the time by, you know, I was a big fish in a small pond in my tertiary college. You know, I knew I was good at English, I knew I'd go and do a degree in it, and I came here and everyone was really clever. But you know, that didn't affect me as much in the study of English, I have to say. It affected me a bit more when I went out to try and do journalism for the student newspapers. And when I was 15, I started to have a weekend job on our local weekly newspaper, the Llanelli Star, and I used to do picture captions and go do little stories, and I did that until just before my A-levels. I was I was interviewing vicars and doing all this stuff, you know, and getting a real training in journalism with a great editor. And I thought, oh, when I go to Oxford, I'll do journalism. And I must say, I just found it, I did one album review in first year and run a mile, because everybody was so confident. I wish I could tell the 18-year-old me now, you know, they might seem confident, they're not all confident, and also just do it, just persevere with it, even if you think your writing isn't good enough, just persevere, because it took me a long time to, you know, to get into it. But with English, I found the first year quite full on, because it was, no offence Bernard, Old English is a hard thing to start with, but Bernard made the tutorials lovely and interesting, I have to say, and I still love Beowulf. Is Old English or medieval? Old English. Yeah, thank you. It's been a long time. Asking one of the other main experts in the country. But I really loved, when I got a bit more confident in my second and third years, you know, when I went to specialist subjects, and I was really into more contemporary, sort of 20th century literature, just every week being given, you know, sometimes it was full on, obviously, doing 2 essays a week was what we did then, and that might be what you do now. But, you know, basically having access to all these libraries and being told you can go and, you know, take this subject or write in this area in any way you like, was quite exciting. And in the third year, the Radcliffe camera, oh my God, I just had such fond memories of my third year in the Radcliffe camera. I did do lots of stuff outside study, but I just hid there for most of the third year. And I'd go and get a big breakfast in what used to be the factory with my friends. Then I'd be queuing up outside the Rad Cam at 10 to 9 in the morning, not every morning. But, and then I'd try and do a really full day there, and I'd get stacks of books. And I loved that. I remember doing Shakespeare with a teacher called Robin Robbins and reading about Shakespeare and Greek mythology and all this stuff. And I was really interested in literary theory and philosophy. I did lots of that, built all that stuff in. I just loved it, and I really loved my special subjects and the long essays, the dissertations and stuff like that. It's funny, I was much happier doing that than exams. My exam results went from a really high one first, really good one, on T.S. Eliot, to a really low third. They were quite random, but the long essays I wrote got good marks, and it's funny because when I was writing this, I was struggling to get to the end of this. I was struggling to get to the end of writing this book because I have a child, I have a husband with a full-time job, I have freelancing, I have to earn money, I have to pay my mortgage, all this kind of stuff. I was like, I need to go away to just be completely aside from family life and go. My husband's amazing. I was like, yeah, you should do it. Why don't you go to Oxford for a week? And I stayed in Staircase 1, where I lived in my first year, and I spent a week in right off camera. And it was exactly what I needed. And one thing I'd say, when you're here, if it's a library you really love, just enjoy it as much as you can. I loved the theology library, actually. That was a really great place to work. I didn't really do much theology at all, but we had some interesting philosophy books. And I just kind of, that's my addiction to research as a journalist, and trying to find stuff that nobody else has put in an article came from that time in my life. And the way the lecturers pushed us towards, newer ways of thinking. That's definitely stayed with me throughout everything, even when I'm interviewing bands.
I think we've touched on this a little bit, but I wanted to ask you about how you think your experience of Oxford was affected by coming from a non-typical Oxford background, and whether you think that, because I think it can be quite daunting coming here, and also quite, in some ways, alienating, imposter syndrome, stuff like that, when you come from a less privileged background when you're here. But I also thought it would be quite interesting to maybe then lead into the world of journalism and whether you've had similar experiences. I know that I saw your article in The Quietest about being a woman in music journalism, and have there been parallels you found in sort of being from a less privileged background in Oxford and then in the world of journalism?
Yeah, it's funny because, as I said just now, my parents, owned a house with a mortgage, and my mum was a primary school teacher. She had a good full-time job with a good pension, and my stepdad worked for her. My dad, who died when I was little, who wrote about the book, was also a teacher, and then my stepdad had a solid job with British Steel. For where I'm from, we were pretty middle class, and we were middle class, and we were pretty privileged. And I had my mum's parents, one side, my grandmother's father was a manager at the local colliery, which was, you couldn't get much higher than that, but then the other side, my grandpa was from a family of, there had been 11 children, I think 4 died, and they lived in poverty in a small house in Llanelli, so I think it's not just, obviously the money you have as a child is very important to your idea of yourself, but it's also something to do with the culture you're from and the references you're used to. And my parents were from a very classic Welsh and our Welsh Baptist chapel background, and you didn't raise your head above the parapet, you didn't, who do you think you are, and all this kind of stuff. So, but I knew I was, school was a sort of, studying in school was a big escape for me from my grief from my dad, and my mum encouraged me, to read, and she loved that I was, always had my head in a book. She used to bring, I used to have a little desk that she bought me for Christmas with an inkwell, so she used to bring it to the garden in the summer because I wouldn't go outside, so I'd be reading or writing a story. So, in some ways I think it's crazy because I was really privileged. My house wasn't full of books, but I also had this great uncle who was, you could imagine him being, when I first met Robin Robbins, who was a classic old Oxford tutor, he reminded me of my Uncle Gwyn. My Uncle Gwyn had a library with and he loved maps, and he loved all this stuff, and he lived in this nice house in Aberystwyth, and he was the Deputy Chief Librarian at the National Library of Wales. He was, this educated figure. He didn't sound very Welsh, he'd almost trained the Welsh out of him. He was a wonderful, wonderful man, and he'd sent me full quartet by T.S. Eliot for my 18th birthday. He was that kind of uncle. So I had him. But yeah, when I did come here, I was like, it was just the confidence some people had I couldn't get over. I don't know if I was even aware of it. I don't think, because I just kind of, bumbled through, and I was throwing myself, I was joined the Film Society and got involved in student politics. I was doing loads of stuff, and I think people thought I was really confident and, outgoing. And I am in some ways, but it does mask a lot of anxiety and nervousness behind the scenes. But yeah, I was kind of found, even though I'd gone to what was on paper a terrible comprehensive school, but I had a teacher called Mrs. Gill, who I first acknowledgement in this book, because at 16 she said she could write a book one day, Jude Rogers, and it took me 28 years, but I did it. And I had a brilliant English teacher who made me read Virginia Woolf when I was just reading Sweet Valley High, and then I had to, kind of read these pop boy, I don't know if you know those, but kind of like really crap, trashy girls' fiction. And then I went to a really progressive tertiary college, because that was the only option near us, and it was amazing. And they had an Oxbridge programme, which is basically why I came here. And I had a tutor who would, we'd have 30 minutes once a week where our tutor would be like, right, we're going to Page of the Wasteland. Right, today, we're going to watch 10 minutes of Battleship Potemkin, this Russian film. And it was amazing. So I had all this educational privilege from different places, but I didn't necessarily have the confidence. And I didn't know people, and it amazed me that when it came here, lots of people, their families knew each other, or people knew, there were kind of a few people in my college that obviously knew each other from school, and there was one girl from my tertiary college in Keyball, but we went to different schools, we didn't really know each other. Nobody went, I think I was the first person from Penrhon Comp to come here. Yeah, I think it was that confidence, and also people, it's funny, I listened to a really brilliant podcast on the way to the station today. There's a podcast called The Bunker, which I do present some episodes of that sometimes. But it was a really great episode about Boris Johnson and his circle at Oxford, and how Oxford didn't make them who they were. The life before made them who they were. But how the Oxford Union facilitated people like that. When I first came here, I thought the Oxford Union was the students' union. And then when I read about it, I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. Yeah, I felt in Wadham, I was quite, in many ways, I was quite insulated from the more Bullingdon Club aspects of Oxford. I hope they're not as prominent now. I don't know if any of you have experienced them in any ways or seen any, but there were elements of it I saw in Oxford University Student Union meetings. But Wadham felt like a relatively safe place. But after leaving Wadham, I did a master's degree in Royal Holloway at the University of London. Then I spent the next 3 years doing completely random jobs that I could have done when I left school at 16. And I know my CV was President of Students' Union, Tier 1 from Oxford, distinction from Royal Holloway, and I had a scholarship to go there and everything, but I just didn't have the confidence. That could be with doing me, but I think it was I was a bit thrown. So if you were thrown when you were in Oxford with people like that, I worked hard and I've got on with my life and poured myself into my writing eventually, when I just thought, I'm going to just try and fake it, to try and get, do stuff. And I ended up making a fanzine with a friend of mine, which was just something to pass the time and have fun with. And because I desperately wanted to write, which got picked up by a music magazine, which eventually offered me a job 2 days a week, opening the post and making tea, when I was 25. And it was called Word Magazine, and it was amazing. And I got in there, I did pub shifts to make up my money, and then I did more reviewing for them, and they raised my salary, and then I got this full-time job there, and so basically from 2003 I've been a journalist. And what got me there was writing, keeping doing it, throwing my creativity into it, trying to convince myself to believe in myself. I think when I was in my early 20s as well, you haven't necessarily, I think all the nice people are nervous about stuff. I'm still nervous before every interview I do, And I've taught students that if you're nervous, it's not a bad thing. You want to do your job well. If you go into something and you're not nervous, that is a problem, I think. Because you're arrogant and you're, you know, Boris Johnson's in my head again. Very sad. But, yeah, I think I've answered that question, possibly. But yeah, I think I've had, you know, lots of opportunities as a journalist. There are some sections of the media that do still not value or appreciate female writers, female writers, as much as male writers. There are some monthly music magazines that are still dominated by men, and I know that I want to get a look into them, even though I've got 20 years experience and I've interviewed loads of famous people. But I've come to terms with thinking, well, that's just going to die because the world's changing and nobody's going to want to read them. I hope so anyway. But most of the other things, you know, broadsheet newspapers, loads of other magazines, so many more non-white men are writing for them, which is brilliant, and long may it continue.
Talking of your music journalism and more widely the world of it, I wanted to know what your take on the current state of the world of music journalism is, especially with the rise of the internet, platforms like Pitchfork. I'd love to know what you think of Pitchfork, but then also the side of it of YouTubers, YouTube music reviewers, TikTok as well as a platform now. How do you think that it's affecting music journalism, and where do you think music journalism will continue on in the way that it has?
Yeah, it's funny because I'm 44 and I did join TikTok briefly about a year ago to try and write something, and I just thought, this, you know, I'm 44 now. This is funny. This is for the youngsters. Obviously, there will come a time when my 8-year-old will, you know, want to join TikTok, I'm sure, and he talks about it already, he's aware of it, without me. I have to say, I plead ignorance in some quarters because I basically in the last couple of years realised I'm not the person who's desperate to find the best new thing anymore. That has sort of left me. I still get excited by new music, I still listen to radio stations and listen to DJs I love who will play me new stuff. But you know, I was listening to Radio 3 the other night and I really loved this recording of this song, and it was recorded in 1944 and I was like, yeah, that's my new music, that's great. I'm still really curious, but I'm not in that sense that, you know, I'm plugged into the industry of music journalism. It's like, who's the hot new band, who's the hot new act, who's, you know, going to headline whatever this year, you know. I think that is a place of people younger than me. And I generally now interview people who've got longer careers, or yeah, occasionally a new band or new artist come along that I find really interesting. Yeah, I did the Heritage Act these days a bit more. You know, that could be something to do was around when I was in Wadham. I think I started as a music journalist in 2003. The internet as a social thing was in its infancy. I had made friends off fan forums. There was a music forum for a record label through which I met people. We'd gone to clubs and that kind of stuff. And that stuff was starting to change, you know, change the nature of fandom in general. You know, when I was a fan at the age of 15, I was writing about the book. I was a fan of the band REM. There was no way we contacted another REM fans because the internet didn't exist, and you know, I could try and find a pen pal in Smash Hits, or you know, occasionally a fan club newsletter. But you know, these days you can find a community like that, which is amazing. I'm quite jealous of that in some ways. I wonder if it would change the intensity of my teenage connection with bands, though, I don't know. I think journalism in general is in a really healthy place. It is when I started out, it was so male and so white, and the magazine I worked at was seen as slightly unusual because we had 2 regular writers who were writers of colour, and it was like, oh my god, you know, this is an unusual music magazine, and it was like, yeah, it's only 2. You know, we knew we needed to do more in that thing now, but there's still magazines who do not do that at all. I write a lot for The Guardian and The Observer. The Guardian has massively expanded its output. It writes more about artists from all corners of the globe. It uses writers from, you know, who aren't, you know, a white man in his mid-40s anymore, which is great. You know, I'm aware though, I'm a white middle-class woman in my mid-40s, so I'm part of the problem in some respects. I do still, when I go into The Guardian, get the same fear that I used to go to some Oxford journalism meetings though. I still get, oh, I've got a regional accent. Although it's not as Welsh as you. I don't know if you can hear the Welsh in my accent, but kind of it's, when I talk to my mother, it's much Welsh. You know, it's I really am encouraged that, you know, there are some amazing writers. Like Stephanie Phillips is such an exciting writer. She's in a great band called Big Joni. I think she's just amazing, and she's really mentors and supports the people. I think a writer like her would have really struggled to make it through in 2003, which is ridiculous, but that's how it was. So I think social media has enabled people to put themselves out there in a really positive way. Obviously, then you get the flip side of that, as people can respond to you and reply to you. I've had some of that, you know, with my less controversial opinions on some matters, but kind of not as much as some people. You know, I think, you know, obviously we all know the terrible bits of social media, but it did really open up, you know, the ways in which people could talk about things and write about things. And yeah, Pitchfork, I don't read as much anymore. They used to. I do still kind of refer to it every now and then. I think one thing about journalism these days that worries me a bit, music journalism, is very serious. It's all, you know, there's nothing wrong with writing about music in terms of its relation to social issues or issues of gender or sexuality. Not at all, I'm not saying that. But there's very little joy in when people love a band and write about a band. I want to really feel that coming through the page on the screen. And quite a lot now I read an article on like Lorde or something like that. It's all like, why is she important? Why is this so important? It's like, well, because you love her and her music's great. I try and make that come off the page. And I think there's less of that these days, and I want more of that. You know, when I was first reading the music press when I was a teenager, you know, it was the opposite. It was like people going on 2-week drunken tours with bands, and there would be all the little details about backstage and stuff. Access to artists has changed a lot as well. You know, you're not going to go on a 2-week press trip with bands anymore. When I started out, I was going on press trips internationally, but not many. In the 80s and 90s, they happened all the time. You know, nowadays I'll go to Cardiff occasionally. You know, which is nice. Nothing against Cardiff, even though I'm from Swansea. But yeah, that's changed a lot. And also, artists now don't need journalists as much. You know, we were the gatekeepers, and now artists can, you know, post on Instagram, and that's it, which is great. I still want to read a good writer telling me why this artist is great, though. Somebody can be a guide to you or a mentor to you in your, you know, discovery of music. You know, and there's writers I still go to and go, oh, what do they think? You know, what are they listening to or what they're doing? You know, it's like a friend or a great DJ or something.
Talking of writing, I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about yours. I think I'd actually be really interested to hear about your fanzine. We have
oh, do you do a fanzine?
Yes, owner of a zine in the room.
What's your fanzine? Wow. Zine, sorry. Do you please say fanzine? Oh, amazing. What's it called? Cool. Right, we'll talk about this more later. and it's you print it out, right? Yes. Good. Analogue, like it.
Yeah. There's a couple around Wadham.
Brilliant. Oh, it's so nice just having something to hold and, you know, designing it, and, you know, it's a completely different set of responses, I think. I'm so bored of looking at the screen this time.
What was your zine about?
It was called Smoke, a London Peculiar. Now, smoke because of the big smoke. So I lived in London. I moved to London in '99 to study. I was studying at Royal Holloway, which was in Egham in Surrey, but managed to find a room in an insane flat in Edgware Road in London, really a friend of mine, lived in Bexley. And I found London terrifying for the first year and wanted to run away and move somewhere else, but I didn't know what to do in my life, as previously mentioned. But I started sort of falling in love with London's weird corners and, you know, the fact that there's all these layers of history. You'd walk down an alley off in Soho and you'd find something unusual. Well, yeah, quite often quite unusual. Or there'd be a strange ghost tube station or something like that. I started getting interested in the kind of that. And I met a guy called Matt Haynes, who used to run an indie record label in the 1980s and 90s called Sarah Records. Very, very indie pop. And he was from London, and I was getting records from him, sending an email to get a record, and he said, "Oh, have you seen this thing on Waterloo Tube Station?" I said, "Oh, but have you seen this thing on in Leytonstone?" And we just, and I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do this little magazine, sort of like a fan club letter about London? And I suggested it to him, really nervously, because I was thinking, I really want to write. I'm working for a corrupt charity in Acton in West London, up a fire escape that looks to be falling down. I shouldn't be doing this, I want to be writing. And he said, yeah, let's do a fanzine. So we saved up 50 quid each every month, which was a huge ask, because we had no money. But he used to distribute records around London by literally putting them in his rucksack and going around shops and saying, will you buy these? I'll give you 20, you can return them if you don't do them. So he did South of the River, I did North of the River. And a guy wrote an article about us for The Independent, and then somebody else wrote an article about us for The Guardian, and then this magazine called Word asked us, I sent one to them, and they said, oh, we want you to be Magazine in the Month, can we interview you about it? And that's how I got my foot in the door with that magazine. But it was a collection of, slightly whimsical at times, but fun little stories about London, some sort of histories. I wrote an article in the first issue about how Jimi Hendrix used to live next door to Handel. Basically, Jimi Hendrix lived in a house that was next to a house that the composer Handel did. And I wrote this kind of fanciful, it's kind of embarrassing reading it now, a kind of fanciful kind of story about what it was like if the two of them had met and music would have moved. And I wrote an article about calypso music. I used to live in Dalston. I later lived in Dalston in East London, and at the end of this market, which next to a bin of rotting meat, and a calypso music stand. I started listening to calypso music and writing about the wave of immigration to London in the late 40s and 50s, and the music that came, and the popularity of calypso music on television. And in London I wrote about that, and I was just writing about music. And the first article I wrote for Word was actually about a book about London, but I started writing about, it wasn't just music, but that magazine was music and films and books. So I wrote a lot about films. I did lots of film reviews, which I miss. I'd love to do that more. It's funny, once you're known for something, people go, oh, you can't write about film. You write about music, so I'd love to write about film more. But yeah, that's how it happened for me, but it was, a lot of going around random bookshops in London and going, will you stock us, please? And Foyles in London had a great bookseller who just kept selling out, and then loads of other shops, read about us, and it took off a bit, and that was really great. But in the first issue, it looked terrible. It was done on Microsoft Publisher, but it was fun, and Matt knew what he was doing, and he knew what he was doing in terms of selling it, and I became a journalist quite quickly. He just carried on doing it. That was my way in. But my editor at Word, my first magazine, said, if anybody asks me how to get into journalism, I'll tell them, do what you do. Make something, pour your heart and soul into it, and then you go, this is what I've done. I think it does make a difference, because the number of emails I used to get when I was working as a reviews editor at Word from people who were very confident and probably entitled in some way or another would be like, oh, I'd like to write for you, I'm going to write this for you, I'm going to interview this person for you, if you give me their contacts. I was like, no. I had the more tentative emails saying, oh, I've written this article for my Street magazine, I thought it was really good, but I think I like it, and I really loved this article you wrote in this. And I'd read every email, and it was mostly the more tentative people that would get answers. But obviously that was 2002, 2003 we made that. Since then, platforms online, you can make anything online now. You can put yourself out there online, and you can. So I'd encourage anyone, if you don't want to make a fanzine, which takes a lot of work, I appreciate it. Have a portfolio of work online. Have a website where you just write random things every day, or try and think of a little idea that marks you out as different. I always say to wannabe journalists, if there's something you've got a lot of knowledge about, if you've got a specialism, like if you're really, really, you know everything about grime, or you know everything about 18th century pottery, or whatever it is, have these areas where your little fads and fascinations, make people aware of them. I know for some people I'm Jude Rogers, the folk music reviewer for The Guardian, which is hilarious. For some magazines I'm Jude Rogers, the pop music fan. For some people I'm Jude Rogers, she's Welsh, so if they've got any Welsh stories, we'll call Jude, even if the story is in Anglesey, which is 4.5 hours away from where she lives. But there we go. Yeah, it's but you know, enthusiasm and doing stuff is the thing that makes a difference.
I think we've also briefly gone over this, but I think it links in quite well to what you've just been saying of what you did after uni and how you ended up where you are now. Because I think that's a big thing that is on a lot of people's minds at the moment, is what on earth are we going to do when we finish our degree?
Yeah. It's terrifying. I remember it now. And I said to you, God, you turned 20, like, oh my God, I'm 20, I'm so old. Why haven't I written a best-selling novel? And then you get to 30, you're like, oh my God, I've got, you know, I may have done some stuff, but why isn't it as good as this? And you get to 40, you're like, you know, I can say that now, I can say that, because I have done stuff. I know I have done stuff. But I think it's, you know, people will pretend they don't remember what it's like being 20. We do. It's hard. It's really tough, because all these possibilities are there and you don't know what to do. And don't get try not to get intimidated by the people who seem to have it all sorted, because they might not, and they might start something and then fail at it. And you're probably going to fail at things. I failed at lots of things. I started 4 books before this one. Yeah, you know, and sort of, I gave up on one, and I saw somebody published, basically, I was thinking, oh, that could be my next book, and then somebody did the same thing and came out last month. I was like, damn it, that's my second book. Can you read it? You know, I'd say just try not to panic too much about it. Nobody's got their, you know, life set out before them. Just take every opportunity you have to do things that you find interesting and meet interesting people and talk to them. And, you know, if you want to be a journalist, it's hard work, you know, because loads of people want to be a journalist, you know. And I still, you know, I'm now at my age thinking, you know, there's loads of people, and I'm now of an older generation, there's loads of other people. My editors quite often are like 15 years older than me, which is terrifying. So I'm basically past it, so you shouldn't be asking me. But I think, you know, allow yourself to fail, allow yourself to get things wrong. I was nearly 25 when I started it. You know, I was 25 and a half when I started working for Word. And when I was 24, I remember my 24th birthday going in tears, my then boyfriend going, what am I doing in my life? I've messed up. And you know, and when you're at those low moments, you know, hopefully you won't have those low moments, you'll get a great job or you'll get a great path career and you'll be fine. But loads of people, when you're looking at the people, like, you know, you're looking at that book in Blackwell's and you're going, oh, bet she's been doing that all her life. You know, most people who've done these things, well, not just, there'll be some who've had the privilege and had that stuff, but there'll be, I've been amazed how many people in journalism did not have an easy routine, or really messed up, or, you know, they edited a magazine that completely, the guy who's the Guardian main music critic, Alexis Petridis, was the editor of Slack magazine, which was a massive magazine when it folded, when it ceased to exist. Which was, you know, that was a big thing, because that had been a massive magazine through the 1990s. People don't remember that now. At the time it was like, oh my God, I killed a magazine. But just there'll be lots of people who are in those positions of, you know, authority or knowledge. But don't think that, you know, they will fail, they'll make mistakes, and they'll have got through that to get there. So when you're having crap moments, you know, just such, yeah. Have a cry, have a drink, or whatever you do. Whatever you do, you know, have hot chocolate, just moan to your mates, do all that stuff, you know, allow yourself to have some time, not trying to do the next thing and be the next thing, you know, enjoy your friends, you know, and think, you know, try again, or try something else, you know. I know people now, my age, who are having career changes, you know, doing different things, and but when you're 20, you feel like you've got to have the rest of your life mapped out, because that's how the conversations go, but you don't, so don't worry.
I think this is a good juncture to talk about the book.
Okay.
The achievement.
I should point out, lots of people have said it's the colours of the Ukraine flag. When I wrote this, when this design was decided upon, it was last summer, so I've not, there's no link. People are saying, did you pick those colours? No, of course I didn't. They're beautiful colours. I love the cover. That's not me. Everybody thinks it's me, but it's not me. But she does have a very similar haircut to me when I was little.
Firstly, I was going to ask if there's anything that you'd like to read from the book that comes to mind.
What do you want? Do you want a sad bit? Or do you want a... So I've read... So I've often read the beginning, which is quite sad. I could read a bit where... There's no bit in Woodstock, sadly. I did write an article for the Wadham Gazette under Bernard's editorship a few years ago, which was about Woodstock, which I did sing in. I briefly sang in bands. I did a cover of Jimi Hendrix's Little Wing. I bet it was terrible. What shall I read? Okay, I'll tell you what, I'll give you some options and you put your hands up and I'll decide. Primary school teacher mum in me. So, you could have the preface, which is all about the inspiration for my book, which is my late father. So, slightly sad. You could have a bit where I meet my teenage hero, or you could have when I was an indie kid who, while in Wadham, and went to a dance music festival. So, sad bit with my dad. What's the second one? Teenage hero, festival one. Or just shout, I don't mind. What do you think?
I'd quite like to hear the festival.
Okay, fine. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is actually at the time I'm in Wadham. There's basically 10 different books I could have written about music, because I could write a whole book of my first year in Staircase 1, Room 7, no, Staircase 1, Room 5, which is a bit unsettling, with Jenny Coombs, who got the top PQs on her third year. She went to state school in Lichfield. This is being recorded, isn't it? She smokes a lot of cannabis. Probably why she got us for the time one. Yes. Yeah, quite a one. She's amazing. She's a lawyer, the European Union now. She's amazing. Yeah, she's amazing. She's a bit more.
Definitely edit that out.
She's brilliant. And yeah, basically spent most of my first year listening to, I don't know, various lots of dance music and strange dub reggae, smoking silk cups. Okay, so this is chapter 6. They're all good tracks, track 6, and they're all each. Each chapter is named after a music track. So this is track 6, Radioactivity, Kraftwerk, how music moves us together. One night in June 1997, when I'd not long turned 19, I was a tiny speck in a gargantuan dark tent, held tight within swells of people and a tide of cyclical, rising electronic sounds. Never before had I experienced music this loud. Sound seemed to be shuddering each and every synapse inside me, electrifying every cell. Our new masters were high above us, in suits gridded with green neon lines, directing us to the precise metronomic rhythms. I hadn't taken any drugs. I didn't need to take any drugs. I'd used the last dregs of my student loan to get a place on a coach to a field outside Luton. I knew it was one of my greatest ever decisions. That pulse, that room, that sound, I was more exhilarated and energised than I'd ever been in my life. The song that took me to that field was something I'd first heard 2 years earlier in my family's front room, a net curtain away from where I last saw my dad, a floor below where I'd daydreamed about Michael Stein, a hall away from where I'd seen Adamant and Nena Cherry on TV. I heard it downstairs because this song wasn't my discovery to keep to myself. It was Chris Vanstone's, my friend who lived a mile away in the lower half of the village. Every Friday, Chris would walk up the hill past the Reverend James pub, the post office, my grandparents' house and the old phone box, carrying 4 cans of Foster's in his rucksack, piles of CDs rattling away on top. He'd knock the door, charm my mother, cross the terrazzo tiles, come in, pass me a can, and sink into the corner of the sofa. We'd sit in the dim light by the curtains together, crack our ring pulls like old gits, take turns to press play. I liked The Mix by Kraftwerk before Chris had even got it out of his case. He'd bought it second-hand at Llanelli Market, a place more known for rugby ephemera and pork pies than pop music discoveries. A figure loomed from his cover, shot from below, with a humanoid head and torso and spindly robotic arms. Its typeface, which said Kraftwerk and The Mix, was already outdated, made out of blocky pixels. It reminded me of the Spectrum 48K computer. 48K, that's how much memory computers had about it. I'm so old. It reminded me of the Spectrum 48K computer Dad bought when I was small. Dad and I played games on it together and made simple tunes by using the bleep command, enabled by pressing shift on its satisfying rubbery keys. Every now and then after Dad died, I tried to do this on my own, make tiny memories sing from its speakers. So let's go ahead to out to sixth form college, which is where I met Dan Swingler, who's your events manager at Wadham. Really good friend of mine. I was in sixth form. I was talking to him in the corridor earlier on, so maybe some Wadham there. I'll just read a bit when I'm in the field again. Sorry, I should have prepared this beforehand. So I talked to a couple of neuroscientists when my music wants to make us dance. I tell James, this is James Kilner, a neuroscientist who uses MRI scanners would love to use MRI scanners in a rave, because it sadly can't. I tell him that radioactivity made me feel 10 feet tall as I danced to it that night at tribal gathering. After Kraftwerk, I did something most unusual for me too. I stayed up all night. Next came Orbital, then Daft Punk. Both sets were incredible full-body experiences. At 8:30 the next morning, I was found in the jungle tent dancing on my own to Fabio and Groove Rider, where we were meant to be getting our coach home. Many people in my party had been fueled by other things. They were already asleep in their seats. My fuel had been 2 beers, 2 coffees, and an egg bap I'd had at 5 a.m. from a caravan lit like a hopper painting against a sky of deep dawn blue. This chapter is all over the place in terms of it. But yeah, that chapter is about how music, the band Kraftwerk and the song Radioactivity, it's about radioactivity, the bad radioactivity, but it's also about radios and how they encourage people to come together through the radio. So I use that song to leap into the history of the radio, the early radio, the fears around what radio could do. Radio obviously then was used for propaganda purposes by Hitler and Nazis in the Second World War. But after that, the war, Germany had this amazing radio network, which then enabled people after the war to use it to disseminate really interesting modern music and experimental music, which ultimately inspired the men who were in Kraftwerk, this German electronic band, some of you might know, some of you might not. And their music then travelled and influenced the early days of house music in Chicago, techno in Detroit. It was all very, about all these elements of modern life and mechanical things that resonated all over the world, especially in cities that cities that were really suffering. The two main members of Kraftwerk had grown up in Dusseldorf, and West Germany after the war, it was a pretty bleak place for people who, looked sadly back on their recent past, of course. But there was then a city like Detroit, which was in a terrible state in the 80s, similarly got this new culture from this music that was very much influenced by Kraftwerk. So I'm trying to look at how music can connect people from very different cultures, and how a band like them could bring this little shy indie kid who basically liked dancing to Blur and Pulp and discos into this very heady, ravey atmosphere. I was very square. I basically did, I smoked some cigarettes, but I drank bottles of hooch in the college bar, and that was about it. I wasn't one of these wild, crazy ravers, with very wide eyes. I was somebody who just found music just did that for me. Music was my drug. I really enjoyed writing that chapter, because it got me to write about that time in your late teens when music is introducing you to new people and you're going clubbing and you're meeting people and you're going to gigs and yeah, I interview a couple of neuroscientists about how dancing works and how we're the only species. I think the scientists in the room are going to, I'm really nervous because I did a single award GCSE in science. But how dancing is known in neuroscience as a joint action. It's something that when we're doing it together with other people, I think human beings are the only species that can mirror each other's movements directly when they're dancing. And yeah, I don't have all this stuff on the top of my head, but it's really fascinating that something about dancing and music is really important to being human. So I interviewed a couple of neuroscientists about that. I loved, being able to use a song to just explore, that chapter explores German identity, explores my sixth form college, and all these different subjects, and it was just, really fun and joyful to do, actually.
I was wondering if there were any other specific chapters, because I know you were saying that each chapter kind of functions like its own little book in a way that you're looking at different things with being human and music, basically.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if there were any others that maybe you'd like to discuss. I thought is it in the first chapter about the baby's hearing?
Yes. So, just to give you a little overview of the book, it goes through life from the beginning of life to end of life, and obviously not the end of my life because I'm still here. But the last chapter talks about COVID and how my relationship to music changed then, how looking at music again and trying to experience music in a new way helped bring me out of, my stupor, our collective stupor, as people going through this terrible time. But the book starts with me at the front of my house saying goodbye to my dad, who's off to hospital to have an operation when I was 5, and he asked me to find out what the number 1 single was because he wouldn't have found out because he was in hospital. And sadly he died in hospital, so I never got to tell him. So this book is basically me telling him. It was by Paul McCartney, Dad. But yeah, that's there because when I think of music, I think of that moment and I think of that connection to my father. But I'm sure if you're a music fan, there will be songs that instantly take you to maybe a specific event or a specific person or a relationship or something. And I wanted to start with that. But yeah, the first chapter goes back to my first memory, which is of ABBA's Super Trooper. What a track, amazing song. I'm finishing off, I'm writing a thing about ABBA for the Observer for Sunday. I've written about half of it today. About the new the gigs they're doing. They do these gigs in London, but it's not them, it's these sort of avatars, these complete, so I'm not going because I think it'll be terrible. Or I'm not going because I don't want it to be terrible. But my first memory is of my grandma, Irwen, and me in her kitchen in Swansea, singing along to Super Trooper by ABBA. And I find out through the process of this chapter that I was 2.5 when that memory is from when I was 2.5, because my grandma in years since would say, "Do you remember when we listened to Super Trooper by ABBA?" And the chorus goes, "Feeling like a number 1," and it was number 1 at the time, so I could look up when it was number 1, and it was November 1980 when I was 2.5. So I use this to kind of look into why is the music formed a memory when I was that little. And there's this amazing study, I found this out very early on, writing this book, from 2013, showing there was finally evidence that babies could remember music they heard in the womb. So, I'm just going to read this bit, because if I summarise it, I'll get it. This had been proved by scientists for the University of Helsinki's Cognitive Brain Research Unit, who had signed up 24 women for a study, all of them in their final trimester of pregnancy. Half the women were asked to play a specific version of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on CD to their fetuses for 5 days every week at a live volume. After the babies were born, these women were told to destroy the disc and not play it again. The other 50% were a control group who didn't have to do it. So immediately after all these babies were born, and then at 4 months, the scientists played the nursery rhyme to both groups. And as the babies listened, they had little caps of electrodes on their heads to measure their brain activity, which is very, very, very cute. In each of the sittings, all the babies will play the original version of the song chosen by the scientists, plus another in which a few notes were slightly altered. On every occasion, the 12 babies played the song in utero had heightened electrical activity only when they heard the correct version. Crucially, the babies in the other group did not. Project researcher Aino Partinen was unsurprisingly pleased, I say. These results show that babies are capable of learning at a very young age and that the effects of the learning remain apparent to the brain for a long time. Project's principal investigator, Dr. Minna Huatalinen, added that this was the first study to track how long fetal memories remain in the brain. The results are significant, she said, as studying the responses in the brain let us focus on the foundations of fetal memory. The early mechanisms of memory, otherwise, are currently unknown. This is the first time it was found out that we, human beings, can remember stuff from the womb. And the tool was music. And I thought, wow, that's just so amazing. I read this when I was pregnant. I was about 3 or 4 months pregnant, and I looked back. I remember when I started writing this book, I looked back at old notes from my old hard drive to an old laptop, and I found it, and I was like, because I made this little note about it, oh, this would be really interesting to write back. And I'd never done anything with it. But yeah, I thought that was really amazing, and I think throughout this book as well, I'm, you know, as I said earlier, I'm a parent now, and seeing my son grow up has made me think about me as a little girl, and obviously, you know, I'm having time with my son that I didn't have with my father. But I'm also seeing how he's responding to music, and you know, suddenly in the last 2 months, he's got obsessed with Ed Sheeran. He just loves Ed Sheeran. He wants to into bad habits all the time, and I showed him the video. He's like, oh god, he wants to watch pop videos all the time. Obviously, I'm secretly pleased. But I'm going, oh, so and I can see it's like, you know, these different people and ideas and identities and, oh, you know, these things that are outside his little world are starting to excite him. And even I like bad habits now. I used to hate it. But I just like a song by Pitbull as well, called Timber, which I can't stand. And the lyrics are very inappropriate. And I'm like, and he said, can I watch the video to Pitbull? I'm like, no, definitely not. Because the lyrics are but yeah, this... he's making a little playlist now of things, and but yeah, that's making me reflect on, you know, how those things happen, and that he got really obsessed with the Spice Girls for a while, and I knew that was because we'd gone on a holiday with his cousins who moved away, and he was really close to his cousins, and he was really sad when they moved, and he got really obsessed after they left and wanted to play, and obviously he was trying to be with them through the music, and yeah, it's really interesting. This whole book, but writing this book has just made me think so much about the way I've responded to music at different times in my life. You know, when I've grieved, when I've fallen in love. Yeah, there's an embarrassing chapter where I talk about, you know, people I've gone out with in the past, how songs still take me back to those people. Some of them from this college, some of them not. But yeah, it's kind of, you know, you will have these songs that mark points in your life. And yeah, it's been interesting doing it. But yeah, it goes from, you know, I didn't want to, there's a lot of cheesy stuff, you know, there's, which is really important, because cheesy stuff is good, I think. But, you know, there are some more difficult moments. Obviously, there's a bit of my dad, there's a bit about how a good friend of mine, her husband died when he was 40, and we talk about that. There's a chapter that was basically written in Staircase 1 here, about the song Pressure Drop by Toots and the Maytals, which was a song at the funeral of my dear friend Kat's husband. When I came to the Rycliffe camera for a week in September last year, before you all started back, organised by my friend Dan Swingler, who was in sixth form, and I basically interviewed one of the Maytals band sitting in Staircase 1. I think he was back in Jamaica. He was in Miami, and I was in Oxford doing my research and writing and doing an interview, which is a bit of the book that is really special to me, and so that was special because I was here doing it as well.
I think probably a concluding question from me. You write so much about music and memory and the connection that music has to everything in our life. And I was just wondering what music brings you back to Wadham when you hear it.
Oh my goodness, great question. So, a lot of stuff that came out in the late 90s. So, there was an album by this group called Uncle with a K. Just going to link to it. It's all post. Do you know what trip hop is? Is that a thing? Do you know what that means? No. Okay, it's cool. So bands like Portishead, Massive Attack, they always bring me back to Wadham. There's a specific record by a band called Uncle, which I played fairly recently, which I loved when I was here. It hasn't dated well. But I put on, I was thinking Henry Scowcroft, who's a friend of mine who studied here, and he wrote a brilliant book a couple of years ago about, sadly, his partner who died of cancer. It's an amazing book full of research. He's brilliant. He's worked for cancer research for years as well. He's a brilliant guy. But put it on. It's like I'm in Henry Scowcroft's room with my friends, and we're drinking beer, and that's what we are. I also, there's the Jimi Hendrix song Little Wing. It reminds me of the band I used to be in a bit, and it reminds me of specific people. It's funny, some of the music, like there's kind of late 90s records by Blur and Suede remind me of the room I'm staying in tonight, which is Emily Steele's old bedroom, which is very strange because we congregated there before Queer Bop in the first year, and I'm sitting there today going, oh my god, this is the same room where we're all dressed up, and that's all the photos I've got. But yeah, it's kind of funny. Some songs I'll hear and they'll make me think about specific books I was reading. There's a Blur song. I remember reading Moby Dick in my third year. I remember I had to read Moby Dick for my American Literature special paper, and I think I just broke up with my boyfriend, and I was not in a good way. And I basically came in for breakfast and sat in my room and read Moby Dick for like 2 days. And I was there going, I've never read this before, and this is absolutely amazing. And I always think that Blur album was playing when I was reading Moby Dick. But that was a great 2 days. I was completely sorted then. My boyfriend was on these. It was all but thinking about Wales and Blur. It was brilliant. Wales with an H. My memories of Woodstock as well, which still happens here. Is it the same sort of setup, or is it one day, or is it like weekend? I don't know how you do it.
Still a day.
I know because obviously things have been different the last couple of years because of COVID. But yeah, I was bar and social secretary in first year, and helped set up, plug stuff in and gaffer tape stuff down, and it was so brilliant. I really enjoyed it, and even if some bands were terrible, it didn't matter. It was really fun. I do still prefer small gigs and small festivals, and that's all stuff's fun.
Would anyone like to ask any questions?
Or not? It's fine. You can ask Alexis. All right.
I was going to say, I'd love to ask questions, but I'm conscious that we also have to go to the next stage. So I'll definitely ask you questions then.
Ask me any questions, and I'm on Twitter, and just tweet me and I'll answer on most questions.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Lily. Thank you very much.